everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and today I'm doing my worst books of 2023 wrap up. So this is the first of my end of year wrap up series. I watch these videos every year of people's worst books, best books, most anticipated books, their entire year wrapped up, and I love them. So I am so excited to be able to finally do a video of my own. I do have a bit of a cold, so bear with me. So let's just dive right into it. One of the first books I read this year was Babel by R.F. Kuang, and that was one of my first disappointments. I hated that book so much. I shouldn't say hate. I didn't hate that book. I don't get the hype around that book. It was so boring. Nothing happened for like 300 pages out of a 500-page book. And then when something finally did happen, I wasn't invested enough in the characters to care. And it was like a pretty big thing that happened. Babel read very much like a linguistics or history textbook. It was so boring. A quick synopsis of Babel. In Babel, we follow Robin, who is an orphan that has been kind of adopted by a professor at Oxford. He's tutored, and then when he is of age to go to Oxford, he's brought to Oxford and entered into this elite school within Oxford that is Babel. Within Babel, the students study linguistics and different languages, and they use that to etch words into silver, giving the silver powers, basically. So different word combinations create different outcomes, I guess. You have to be very careful with your word combinations, with what language you use. There's all sorts of intricacies around this magic system, but basically they can then embed that silver into various things to produce various results. Yes, that's really simplifying it, but that's the gist of things. So it follows Robin's time within this elite school. I thought that sounded really interesting. I was curious about where it would go, and it was boring. It was so much about language and linguistics and different dialects of languages, and it wasn't presented in an interesting way. Like I said, I felt like I was reading a textbook. Yeah. Anyway, I should have DNF'd it. One of Babel's only redeeming qualities or aspects of the book was it did have very good commentary on colonialism, racism, and sexism in the 1800s, especially in England. But that's all it had going for it. And that was a bummer. I don't get the hype. I do not get the hype. The next book I was really disappointed by was The Housemate? No. Was The Housemate by Frida McFadden. And this book was a hot mess of a thriller. It packed in every single popular thriller mystery trope. It was very predictable, extremely unbelievable. And I've heard it follows the plot of another thriller that was published a few years before almost exactly. Like, people were shocked at how similar these two books were. I heard it from a number of people who are regular thriller readers, and they're like, this is the same exact book. So that bothers me. It wasn't well written. The main character wasn't likable. I wasn't really rooting for her. So The Housemate follows our main character. I don't remember her name. She has had kind of a troubled past, has a hard time keeping down a job, and eventually winds up applying for a position in a very wealthy family's home as a maid. It's a live-in position, which is perfect for her because she's living out of her car. So she goes to the interview, and the wife of the household is like very kind. It seems like very interested in hiring her. And so she's just like, I hope my background check doesn't scare her off. And lo and behold, everything goes through. She's hired for the position, and she's like, wow, this seems like it's too good to be true because this lady seems super nice and super welcoming, and it seems like the perfect job for me. Then she starts to move in and get oriented with the house, and turns out the room that she's staying in is actually like a closet in the attic, and there's a lock on the outside of the door and what looks like to be like scratch marks on the inside of the door as if someone's been locked in there. I mean, that's a huge red flag, but she's like, nah, whatever. I'm just gonna like ignore that because you wouldn't have a book if she was like, I'm gonna call the cops. That's not right, but okay. And then things with the wife start getting weird. She starts to kind of gaslight her and all of a sudden isn't nice and starts accusing her of things and almost like setting her up to fail. And things just go downhill. Things escalate. Things aren't what they seem. It's a mess. I really don't like it at all. The next book that was a major disappointment was A Happy Place by Emily Henry. I love Emily Henry. Book Lovers is one of my all-time favorite books. So I was so excited about Happy Place, which the premise of the book sounded fun. It was about a couple who used to be engaged, and they were part of a larger group of friends. And every year, this group of friends vacations in Maine, I think, for a week in like a house on the ocean. And it's a super fun thing. They all look forward to it every year. The couple that's engaged winds up breaking off their engagement, but they don't tell their group of friends for a number of reasons. They have a host of excuses. And then next thing they know, it's the week of the vacation. And they're kind of like, well, which one of us, we can't make an excuse for one of us to go and one of us not to go if everybody's expecting our friend group to be together. So they both go, but they pretend to be together again. So it's a fun kind of spin on the fake dating trope because it's also like a second chance romance, fake dating trope situation, which was fun. But my biggest issue with this book is the fact that the whole book could have been resolved and like there wouldn't even be a book if the characters had just talked. I don't know. I'm bamboozled. Apart from that, I really did enjoy the individual characters. I enjoyed the friendship dynamics. But I felt like the book just kind of drug on. And for me, the payoff in the end, the big revelation about what happened was not worth it. The ending wasn't an ending where I was like, yeah, that makes sense for the characters. I was kind of like, really? That's where we're ending? Okay. And like not in a fun way. Yeah, this book was just a complete mess for me, and I was so bummed. The next book is another thriller, and that is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This book I think I might have hyped up a little too much in my head because I had heard so many people describe it as being like really creepy and really twisty and turny. So I was really excited for that experience, and that was not my experience at all. So basically, Rock, Paper, Scissors follows a couple who's having a lot of marital issues, and so the wife books them a getaway at a little cottage in like Scotland for the weekend, hoping to salvage their marriage. She's kind of like, this is like the end all be all. Either we will repair our relationship here or we're going to come back divorced. So like, no pressure. And so they get there and they soon realize like things are not what they seem. They're having weird experiences around this cottage and it's like very secluded, but they're seeing like faces in the window and footprints around the house and hearing like creaking and doors opening. So like they feel like they're not alone when they really should be. The secrets kind of get revealed as they start talking. I didn't find this book creepy. I saw a lot of the twists coming, and that's always my biggest gripe with thrillers because like if I'm sitting down to read a thriller, I want to be surprised. Of course, I'm going to try to guess what's happening the entire time. That's half the fun. But when I do actually figure it out, it's not fun. I love the moment where I'm like, okay, I think I know what's happening. And then the author's like, oh, well, no, you don't. And then tells me what's actually happening. And I'm like, whoa, how did I not see that? The breadcrumbs were there. I'm so tired of like domestic issues or marital issues being the center of a thriller. To me, that's not thrilling. It's not like, what's going to happen? It's more like, okay, these are just crappy people. It's more like reading a soap opera than a thriller or a mystery. Alrighty. My next disappointing book is actually kind of two books. They're part of the same series, so I'm just lumping them together because I thought it would get better from book 1 to book 2, and it did not. And that is the Finlay Donovan series, starting with Finlay Donovan is killing it, and then Finlay Donovan knocks him dead. This follows Finlay Donovan, who is a murder mystery writer, and it starts with one day she is sitting in a cafe with her agent or editor or whatever, talking about the premise of her next book. Someone overhears her talking about this murder mystery novel, thinking she's talking about actually committing that crime. So the lady thinks she's a hit woman. And she winds up slipping her a note saying, like, I have a job for you. One thing happens after another, and Finlay finds herself entangled in this potential hit. It's a very chaotic book, and the premise, again, sounded really fun and kind of comical. In a lot of ways it was. I feel like in a lot of ways it was kind of poking fun at thrillers, which I kind of enjoyed that. It didn't take itself too seriously. However, I feel like the beginning of the book was interesting. The middle really drug on. And then the ending was like, okay. The first book ended on a note where I was interested enough to see like what would happen in the next one. So we did that, read the next one. Same experience where the beginning was kind of interesting. The middle really drug on. Still really was struggling with a lot of the characters. I'm just kind of like, I'm not connected to any of you. I don't really care what happens. And then the ending of the last book, like, ends in just a way where I'm like, okay, I guess I am kind of interested. But then I'm like, no, I'm not falling into this trap. I just feel like readers are being strung along a bit. So I think there's like 4 books out now, potentially. I'm not going to be continuing them, but my next book was Dead 11. This book was kind of described as being like similar to Lost, but horror, I guess. And that really intrigued me. I love Lost. So the premise of this book is there is an island off the shore of Michigan called Clifford Island, and it is basically stuck in the year 1994. The people there dress like they're from the 90s. Their technology doesn't go further. They drive old cars. They are constantly watching the O.J. Simpson car chase literally every day over and over. Like everything on their TVs is from the 90s. It's weird. And so we follow our main character, Harper, who is a journalist, and his younger sister, Willow, had gone to this island looking for answers about her deceased son. He doesn't know why, but for some reason she was drawn to this island and thought she would find answers about her son. She then goes missing. He hasn't heard from her in months. Her husband hasn't heard from her in months. So he goes looking for answers and goes out to Clifford Island. He's finding it really hard to find any information on this island. Doing a Google search is not producing much results other than the fact that there is a little island called Clifford Island, and that's all he knows. He eventually gets there and starts retracing Willow's steps in her final days, and that's kind of where the mystery starts to unravel. And that premise still sounds so interesting. It sounds like it could be creepy. It sounds like it could be weird. There might be a sci-fi element. I don't know. I was like so drawn in by that premise, and I was so let down. This book, first off, was way too long. It was like 200 pages too long. I think it was like either 400 pages, close to 400. It was a very long book for what little payoff you got. And I feel like a good 200 of the pages was just going around in circles. The payoff at the end was such a letdown. Like, the reasoning for what was going on was not only unbelievable, like, I get horror, sci-fi, fantasy, like, obviously it's not going to be super realistic. Even expecting the storyline to be unrealistic in some way, the explanation just didn't make sense for, like, it's so hard to describe without giving away spoilers. Just know it was unrealistic. I was like, you want me to believe that's what's going on? Okay. The ending was a huge letdown, and after kind of trudging through a good 200 pages in the middle of the book, I was hoping for a good payoff. We did not get it. My next disappointing book was The Book Eaters. This book was so weird. It was bizarre. It lacked a plot. It didn't know if it wanted to be fantasy, sci-fi, a thriller. And, like, I think a book can be all those things. But this book, like, for a section it was one, and then it was a fantasy, and then it was a thriller, and then it was, like, a little bit of sci-fi. Like, it was just so all over the place. It was bizarre. Skinny, you want to say hi? So The Book Eaters follows, like, this species of people who consume books as, like, their form of food. They can't eat normal food. They have to eat books in order to survive. And so they, like, talk about how different stories taste and different, like a textbook versus a fairy tale, and, like, it's so weird. And I expected it to be weird just based on that alone. And I was expecting, maybe, like, a little bit of horror elements. So I was, like, ready for the weirdness. But, like, it was weird in not a good way. So we follow a mother and son, and this lady's son has something wrong with him where he can't only eat books to survive. He sometimes needs to basically consume people's, like, brains in order to survive, and he needs to, like, consume their memories and their thoughts and, like, their consciousness in order to survive. And so, like, he basically does that by, like, leeching on to the side of their head, and, like, he basically leaves them as a vegetable. So the mom goes out and, like, lures people back to their apartment to give to him as food, and then when he's done with them, she leaves them at, like, homeless shelters because they're just, like, vegetables. And that wasn't even the weirdest part, honestly. I feel like that was kind of, like, maybe the horror element I was expecting, but the story just progresses, and it goes back when the mom was, like, growing up in her, like, society of book eaters, and the way it's written, it sounds like a fantasy novel, but it only takes place in, like, the 80s or 90s, which is weird because they call themselves princes and princesses, and it's very, like, it sounds as if they're in, like, the Regency era almost. And so then I'm like, okay, it kind of sounds like a cult. And then at one point they mention, like, maybe they're aliens. That's never explored. It's mentioned literally once. That thought is never furthered. So it goes back and forth between, like, her and her weird little cultish Handmaid's Tale-like society, then to modern day when she's, like, trying to protect her son from these people who, like, want to get rid of him. Then that makes it kind of like a thriller because they're, like, on the run and there's random, like, gun chases on trains, and, like, it's a mess. I can't even describe this book to you. Don't read it. Truly. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, there's maybe, like, an audience for a book, but this was just a mess. The next book on my list of disappointments was The September House. This book had all the promise to be such a good haunted house book. I love ghost stories. I love paranormal things, so I was so excited for this one. And I was so let down. So basically, The September House follows Margaret and Hal, her husband and wife, and they bought this beautiful Victorian home. It was a reasonable price in a good neighborhood, and they were kind of like, this seems too good to be true. Why is this price in this neighborhood? Turns out a lot of people have died in the house, and they're like, man, we can look past it. It's fine. So they bought it, moved in. Everything's fine until the first September they spend in this house, and all sorts of paranormal activity gets kicked up. It lasts the entire month of September, and then it goes back to normal as if nothing had happened. But, like, the things that happen in the house are insane. Like, the walls bleed. Like, to the point where by the end of September, blood is coming down the walls, into the hallway, down the stairs. Like, a lot. No matter how much they clean it, comes back. There's a ghost that physically harms them. There's ghosts they see a lot of entities in the state that they died in. So one was like burned, one had an axe like smashed into them. Like, so they see like gruesome things and things get moved around. Like it's a very scary place to be in September. So this happens every September, year after year. Margaret has kind of learned to live by these ghost rules. She knows how to deal with them, what to avoid, how to talk to them, and she's just come to accept it. Hal, on the other hand, can't. He's like done. It's been however many years. So he's like, it's me or the house. She's like, I don't want to leave this house. So he leaves. And then he is never heard from again. They have an adult daughter named Catherine, and one day she calls up her mom, and she's like, Mom, I haven't heard from Dad in weeks. That's unlike him. Like, do you know where he went? And her mom's like, well, we had a fight. He left, and I haven't heard from him. So Catherine's determined to come and solve the mystery of what happened to her dad. However, she's planning on coming in the month of September. Catherine knows nothing about the hauntings of this house. It's not her childhood home. It's not where she grew up. And her mom hasn't really said anything about it. So now her mom's nervous about her daughter being in this super haunted house and having to explain things. And that's kind of where the story takes off. It's about them existing in this house as all these crazy things are happening, them looking for Hal, and that alone still sounds like a good book to me. However, it was the way it was written. The ghosts and the things that were happening in the house were written almost in like a comical way. So like one of the ghosts will bite them. Like that has the groundwork to be really creepy and really messed up. But like the way Margaret kind of talks about it is like, oh yeah, that's Elias. Like sometimes he'll bite you. Gotta watch out for him. Kind of like a pet almost. And so like, it just took the creepiness out of it. That's not what I was hoping for in a book. I wasn't looking for like kind of a funny haunted house book. But I truly don't think that was the intent of the book. I think it was supposed to kind of be scary. It didn't hit. I was really disappointed by it. The next book is another kind of spooky season disappointment, and that is Clown in a Cornfield. I will say, I did not have high hopes going into this. I knew it was probably going to be kind of like a goofy horror slasher book, but like that is kind of what I was looking for going into it. I wasn't looking for anything super serious. I was just looking for something that felt like a good 90s scary movie. I feel like the first half of this book delivered on that. It was when we got to the explanation and the reasoning behind what was happening, I was like, there's no way. Like, that is what we're going with. What? It's like an author has a great premise of a book, but they don't know how to wrap it up. They don't know how to make that, like, ending hit. And so they just use the first idea that pops into their head, and, like, that's not believable. I don't know anybody who's read this book, and I need to rant about it with someone. Let me go back to the premise of this book. So Clown in a Cornfield follows a group of teenagers who live in a town where their town mascot, Friendo the Clown, like that's a big no, having a clown as your mascot. But okay. their town mascot, Friend of the Clown, one night starts to murder people in a cornfield. And yeah, that's the premise of the book. I wasn't expecting anything crazy. I wasn't expecting anything groundbreaking, but it was not good. The last book is kind of another seasonal read. This one was a Christmas read, and that is The Plight Before Christmas. And this book, I was so excited about this book because I've heard so many people say it is a fun Christmas holiday rom-com, and I was here for it. And this happened to be my In Real Life Book Club's book for December. This was just not an enjoyable experience for me. So basically, we follow our main character who her family gets together every Christmas at a cabin, and one year her brother decides to bring a friend home. They don't really know who this friend is, but he brings a friend home, and our main character has been having a rough go at it. She's got passed over for a promotion. Her car's like breaking down on its way out. Like a lot of things are kind of going wrong in her life. She's not in a good mood. Turns out that this friend her brother is bringing home is actually her ex from 17 years ago when she was in college. And her brother's kind of like, well, why is it a big deal? And everyone else is like, you brought her ex home? Seriously? And like, so that's kind of where the story starts off. It's them spending this holiday together as exes. So it's kind of like an enemies to lovers trope and like a second chance romance. But the main character was so unlikable. She was so mean to everyone. Like, I get you're having a hard time in life, but don't be mean to everyone. I hated reading her chapters. Like, I hated being in her head because it made me just feel so like, it just made me feel literally irritated. Like, I was reading this book for an hour or so and I had to put it down because I found myself getting like irritable from reading it. And then the guy, because it switched back and forth between her perspective and the guy's perspective. And the guy honestly gave me the ick. Like, reading from his perspective, some of the things he would say was just so gross. Also, the number of times he mentioned that she had gained weight since college was too many. It was multiple times and it was too many. And then he's like, what happened to my whatever? And I'm like, your first officer, like, he had some pet name for her. Also, it was 17 years ago. Of course her body will change. Like, why do you need to comment on that? And then like, the banter wasn't cute. The flirting wasn't cute. Some of the phrases they said were so cringy. Yeah, I really struggled with this one, and I wanted to like it so bad. So I just was not in a place to read about people being mean to people that care about them. Yeah, I don't know. I really struggled with it. And honestly, the only reason why I gave it 2 stars was because I liked the side characters so much more. Like, there was a funny email chain in the beginning of the book between her siblings and her dad, and that literally was my favorite part of the book. So, I don't know. If you're looking for a Christmas book that will make you feel warm and fuzzy and actually in the Christmas spirit, this is not it. If you are looking for something that is like a good FU to people, then yeah. Then definitely read this. If you're kind of in like the FU mood, then you should read this. Because that's the vibe this gives. So, and then to wrap things up, I'm just going to quickly go over my DNFs of the year. So I was trying to DNF more books this year because there are so many fantastic books I want to get to that I don't want to waste my time on books I'm not enjoying. So I tried to do that this year based on this list. There definitely should have been more books that I should have DNF'd, and I didn't. We're going to work on that in 2024. But the books I did DNF: Wayward. This book I was really excited for. I was hoping it would be witchy, and I had high hopes for it, and I just could not get into it to save my life. Next is The Saturday Night Ghost Club. This book was described as like Stranger Things, but with like paranormal investigators. And again, I got about 50 pages in, and I kept finding myself just skimming it and having to go back and reread pages because I realized I just skimmed it, hoping for something to happen. So that was a bummer. Then I DNF'd On a Quiet Street. This was a thriller that really just, I felt like it was cliche. It used the typical like domestic marital problem tropes. Like, it was very cliche. The writing was not great, and honestly, and I was bored. Then I DNF'd Moon Over Soho, which is a part of the Peter Grant, I believe that's what it is, the Peter Grant series. That series is like Brooklyn Nine-Nine meets Supernatural, which that premise alone sounds so good. However, I really don't like how this author writes about women. He writes about them like they are a piece of meat. It's usually focused on their boobs and butts, and I'm just over it. It's like, seriously, like, it just made me feel icky. And so I DNF'd it. The next one I DNF'd was Cackle. This one I might try again next spooky season, so I'm not going to completely write it off. I just didn't like how it started off with the main character going through a horrible breakup, and then that being repeated over and over for like the next 50 pages about how torn up she was, how much she missed this guy. And I'm like, when's the witchy stuff going to start happening? Because that's what I'm here for. Then I just recently DNF'd The Girls in the Stilt House. This was my book club book for January, I believe. Yeah. This was our January book club book, and I started it a little bit early because we picked it kind of early just to give us time to read it. One thing I love about my book club is we tend to pick books that are outside of my like genre comfort zone. However, I am trying to DNF more books that I'm not enjoying, and I don't enjoy historical fiction. I don't enjoy literary fiction, and this read kind of like both. Like, they were dealing with a lot of family issues, and it was historical fiction, and I just was not having a good time. So I DNF'd it. And then the last one I DNF'd was Hooked. This was a dark romance Peter Pan retelling or reimagining. I know it's really popular. I just don't think dark romance is my thing. I like cozy things, and this was not that. So those are my biggest disappointments of 2023. I have read some fantastic books, though, and I will be filming that video very soon. So definitely stay tuned for that. And yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.